Doug Ford's address marked a turning point in Canada's tone toward Washington. What began as a routine economic speech became a fiery declaration of independence, with Ford calling Trump the elephant in the room and shattering diplomatic politeness. His remarks went beyond Ontario, defending Canadian industry and sovereignty while signaling a shift under Mark Carney toward resisting U.S. economic dominance. Ford's message was clear. Canada will no longer play by America's rules. It's reclaiming control of its own economic destiny.
Today, to talk about Ontario's economy, we can't do so without acknowledging the elephant in the room. President Trump continues to take direct aim at Canada. Well, he's going to really go after us now. I'm reading my speech. I just called him an elephant. But anyways, can't call that guy any name. Anyways, he's added and expanded tariffs on Canadian steel, autos, aluminum, lumber, and copper, just to name a few. He went off kilter and started to go after cabinet makers and so on and so forth. By every measure, he seems intent on putting tariffs on pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, heavy trucks, film industry, and critical minerals. If I've said it once, I've said it a million times. A tariff on Canada is nothing more than a tax on Americans, and I tell that to my American friends. I talk to the governors, senators, and congressmen and women every single day. Ironically, even Republicans, they don't agree with that. They don't agree with President Trump's attack on his closest allies and friends, but unfortunately, they're too scared, to the exception of a few senators, too scared to say anything.
Doug Ford's speech was a rare and direct challenge from a Canadian leader to an American president. By calling Trump the elephant in the room, he broke from diplomatic caution and condemned Washington's economic aggression. Ford listed the industries hurt by U.S. tariffs: steel, autos, semiconductors, and critical minerals, calling them reckless and self-defeating, warning that a tariff on Canada is a tax on Americans. His most striking line came when he said Republicans privately opposed Trump, but were too scared to say anything, turning the moment into one about moral courage. In that instant, Ford transformed his remarks from provincial politics into a national stand for Canada's economic sovereignty and strength.
Yale University has put out the cost of tariffs at about $2,400 for every American household, and expects the American economy to shed nearly 500,000 jobs by the end of 2025. We're already seeing the impact. American manufacturing employment has declined for 5 months in a row, with 78,000 fewer manufacturing jobs in the U.S. today than a year ago. These kinds of enormous costs on businesses result in two outcomes: higher prices for American consumers and fewer jobs for American workers, and inflation on the backs of American workers. Personally, if it were me, these aren't the kind of numbers I'd want to bring into the midterms. But there's good news for President Trump. The fastest, surest, and easiest way to reverse America's economic decline: end the tariffs. Make a deal with Canada, your number one customer in the entire world.
Doug
Yale
Ford's
University
closing
has put
remarks
out the cost of
combined
tariffs
hard
at about
economic data with
$2,400
sharp
for every
political
American
instinct,
household,
transforming
and
a trade
expects the
dispute
American
into a pointed
economy to
critique
shed
of
nearly
Trump's leadership.
500,000 jobs
Citing Yale
by
University's
the
findings
end of
that tariffs are costing
2025.
households $2,400 a year and could erase 500,000 jobs by 2025. Ford framed the policy not as a blow to Canada, but as self-inflicted damage to the American economy. He underscored that U.S. manufacturing had already lost 78,000 jobs, warning that tariffs translate directly into higher prices, fewer jobs, and deeper inflation on the backs of American workers. Then, with deliberate irony, he twisted the knife. If it were me, these aren't the kind of numbers I'd want heading into the midterms. Ford's punchline wasn't just economic. It was political strategy disguised as diplomacy. By offering Trump an off-ramp and the tariffs and make a deal with Canada, your number one customer, he positioned himself as both pragmatic and defiant, turning Canada's economic leverage into a lesson on power, pride, and the cost of populist economics.
Time when President Trump is threatening our auto and steel sectors, will mandate the use of Ontario-made materials in government procurement and Ontario-made vehicles for government fleets, so Ontario tax dollars support Ontario workers. We'll continue to invest in new, resilient, and growing industries, including Ontario's nuclear and critical mineral advantage, creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs, including for workers hurt by President Trump's tariffs.
Doug Ford's response to Trump's tariffs captured a sharp shift toward economic self-reliance and national pride. Instead of pleading with Washington, he proposed bold, homegrown solutions, mandating Ontario-made materials and vehicles in government projects to keep tax dollars circulating locally. Ford turned trade retaliation into an opportunity for renewal, pledging new investments in nuclear energy and critical minerals to create jobs and strengthen domestic supply chains. His message was unmistakable. Ontario would not bow to American pressure, but build its own path forward through resilience, innovation, and unapologetic nationalism.
You know something, when you're dealing with President Trump or Howard Lutnick, it's challenging. And I thought Prime Minister Carney did a good job. It's about building relationships. But President Trump could agree to something one day, he'll wake up and change his mind the next day, and you won't even know what hit you. And I mentioned to the Prime Minister, you know, yes, we have to strike a deal with the U.S., but you can't get rolled over by this guy. We're an economic powerhouse with the U.S. We're the #1 customer. We buy over $356 billion a year U.S., #1 customer in the entire world. Ontario alone is the #1 trading partner, and I always like saying customer, to 15 states, #2 to 12 other states. We do $500 billion of two-way trade alone with the U.S. So if he can't get a deal, we have to hit back.
Doug Ford's comments showed a calculated blend of realism and resolve in dealing with Donald Trump. While acknowledging Trump's unpredictability and crediting Prime Minister Mark Carney's steady diplomacy, Ford drew a firm line. Canada must negotiate but never be rolled over. By emphasizing Canada's role as America's top customer, with $356 billion in U.S. imports and Ontario leading trade with over 24 states, Ford reframed the balance of power, his closing line warning that Canada would hit back if treated unfairly, turned a speech into a statement of national confidence. It was both a message of partnership and a reminder that Canada wields real economic leverage and is ready to use it.
Speaking on behalf of any premier, but my good friend Scott Moe, he has the uranium, he has the potash. The uranium keeps their 94 nuclear facilities going down in the U.S. The potash could devastate the U.S. agriculture. Ourselves, nickel, 60% of the high-grade nickel comes from Sudbury. That's used for their military, for aerospace, for manufacturing. This is just to name a few, not to mention our aluminum and our steel and so on and so forth. So I would definitely not roll over. I'd hit him back hard, in my opinion. And that's what he understands. He can't be bullied, and he shouldn't be bullied. But it's a tough position Prime Minister Carney is in. But I'm glad they're building a relationship.
Doug Ford's comments highlighted Canada's untapped leverage in its trade relationship with the United States. By pointing to Saskatchewan's uranium that fuels nearly all U.S. nuclear plants, potash essential to American agriculture, and Ontario's high-grade nickel used in defense and aerospace, Ford reframed Canada as an indispensable economic ally rather than a subordinate. His message was blunt and strategic. If Washington imposes unfair terms, Canada has the means to hit back hard. While acknowledging the delicate diplomatic role of Prime Minister Mark Carney, Ford made clear that Canada's natural resources are not just commodities, but instruments of power, and that true diplomacy must be backed by the strength and confidence to stand firm against pressure.
I love the U.S., I love the American people. I spent 20 years of my life in our Chicago facility, New Jersey facility. It's not the American people. It's one person, and that's President Trump. They want our energy. They need our energy. We keep the lights on in businesses and homes to 1.5 million people just Ontario alone. In Minnesota, but they want more of our energy, and I have no problem as long as we create a fair deal for everyone across the board. I always believe in the AMCAN fortress. We're stronger together. We'll be the two greatest countries in the world. Rather than fighting over trade, let's work together.
Doug Ford's closing remarks balanced diplomacy with defiance, framing his stance as pro-American but anti-Trump policy. By invoking his own experience living and working in the U.S., he grounded his message in familiarity and goodwill, even as he reminded Washington of its dependence on Canadian energy. His reference to Ontario powering 1.5 million Minnesota homes underscored Canada's quiet strength in the partnership. Ford's call for an AMCAN fortress captured his broader vision, a North American alliance based on equality, not subservience. It was a calculated blend of respect and resolve, a statement that Canada values cooperation, but only on fair terms that recognize its indispensable role in the continent's economic and energy security.